Season 4, Episode 3, The Library Reborn. Prologue, The God Who Learned to Weep. In the depths where light had never touched, where pressure crushed mountains into pebbles and silence reigned absolute for eons beyond counting, a god sat cross-legged on a throne that was no longer frozen. Uchelon held his hands before his face and watched them tremble. 3 days had passed since the surface dwellers had done the impossible. 3 days since they had refused to be consumed, refused to be completed, refused the peace he had offered with such certainty. 3 days since the map had burned itself into his chest and poured a mortal story into the space where his hunger had lived for 10,000 years. The map was still there, glowing faintly beneath his skin. Theren's vambrace had been unmade in the transfer, its impossible cartography becoming part of the god's flesh, but the story it carried, the tent, the touch, the choice, the unborn child, the desperate gamble, that remained. It pulsed with a rhythm that Uchelon now recognized as a heartbeat. My heartbeat, he realized. I have a heartbeat. He pressed his palm to his chest and felt it. Steady. Insistent. Alive. I don't understand, he said to the darkness. The darkness did not answer. It had always answered before, had whispered the names of ending stories, had delivered the taste of completed narratives like offerings to an altar. But now the darkness was just darkness. Empty. Waiting. Expectant. A fish swam past his face, scales catching some impossible light from the god's own glowing chest. Uchelon reached for it, meaning to consume it, to taste its small simple story of survival and instinct and eventual death. His fingers brushed its flank. The fish did not dissolve. It did not end. It paused, hovering in the water before him, and Uchelon felt something entirely new flood through the connection. Curiosity. The fish was curious about him. About the warmth of his touch. About the light beneath his skin. It had never encountered a god before, had never imagined such a being could exist in the crushing dark, and now that it had, it wanted to know more. Uchelon withdrew his hand as if burned. What is this? He demanded of the fish. What are you doing to me? The fish, being a fish, said nothing. It simply waited, fins undulating gently in the current, patient as only creatures of the deep can be. Uchelon stared at it for a very long time. Then, tentatively, awkwardly, he smiled. The expression felt wrong on his face, muscles he had never used protesting the unfamiliar movement. But the fish seemed to approve. It circled his head once, twice, 3 times, then swam away into the darkness, carrying with it the memory of a god's first genuine smile. Uchelon watched it go. The hunger was still there, deep in his core, the ancient need to consume, to complete, to bring all stories to their proper endings. But alongside it now was something else. Something that felt like an echo of Theren's final gift. Wanting. Not wanting to end. Not wanting to consume. Wanting to continue. He did not know what to do with this feeling. In 10,000 years of existence, Uchelon had never wanted anything except completion. The endless appetite that had driven him to devour finished narratives, to build the drowned library as a feeding ground, to reach through Damian's stone form and taste the prime draft's perfect order, all of it had been a single, simple imperative. End. Finish. Complete. Now there was a second imperative, small but growing, fragile but insistent. Begin. Uchelon closed his eyes and let himself feel it. The terror of it. The wonder of it. The impossible, unbearable newness of being something other than what he had always been. You gave me your story, he whispered to the darkness where Theren's map still burned. But you didn't tell me what to do with it. The darkness offered no counsel. So Uchelon sat on his stone throne and practiced being alive. He breathed, though he did not need to breathe. He felt his heartbeat, though it served no biological purpose. He remembered the taste of Theren's emotions, love, fear, hope, despair, and tried to solve them into categories he could understand. It was, he reflected, the hardest thing he had ever done. And somewhere above him, in the world of light and air and stories that refused to end, the consequences of his transformation were already beginning to unfold. Chapter 1: The Third Trunk. The world tree of Echohole had never been merely a tree. It was an axis, a fulcrum, a point where the fabric of reality grew thin enough to see through. Its twin trunks, one gold, one green, had stood for millennia as symbols of balance, of the dual nature of existence, of the eternal tension between order and chaos, structure and growth, ending and beginning. When the third trunk appeared, no one saw it happen. It was simply there at dawn on the fourth day after the expedition's return. Pale as water, strong as stone, rising from the earth between its siblings like a child finding its place in a family portrait. Its bark shimmered with patterns that resembled library shelves seen through deep water. Its leaves, when they unfurled, were the color of sea foam and whispered with voices that had never spoken before. The Curators gathered at its base, staring up in wonder and no small amount of terror. Lexicon arrived first, as she always did. The ancient spirit's form flickered with something that might have been emotion as she extended her perception into the new growth. "Observation," she said, and her voice held a tremor that no one had ever heard before. "The third trunk is not native to either draft. It belongs to neither prime nor shadow. It is other." "Other how?" Helena demanded. She had not slept in 4 days, had barely eaten, had spent every waking moment tending to the wounded spirits of those who had ventured into the drowned library and returned forever changed. Arthur stood at her side, steady as always, his compass warm against her palm. "Other in origin," Lexicon replied. "Other in nature. Other in purpose. This trunk does not record stories. It does not preserve them. It does not guide them toward completion." "Then what does it do?" Lyra asked. She had one hand pressed to her belly, where the child, her child, Theren's child, had begun to kick with increasing vigor since their return. As if the baby knew something they didn't. As if it was eager to be born into whatever strange new world they had created. Lexicon was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It begins them." A rustle went through the assembled crowd. Scribes and scholars, soldiers and diplomats, all of them veterans of the long war against narrative collapse, all of them survivors of the Congress of the Damned and the desperate gamble that had followed. They looked at the third trunk with expressions that mixed awe and fear in equal measure. "New stories?" Saraphina stepped forward, the 4001st glyph pulsing gently in her chest. "Original ones? Not derived from either draft." "Not derived from anything," Lexicon confirmed. "The third trunk is generating narratives ex nihilo. Stories that have never existed before, in any version, in any possibility. They are unprecedented." Theren stood at the back of the crowd, his bare right arm hanging at his side. The van brace was gone now, consumed in the final confrontation with Uchelon, but he still felt its weight sometimes. Ghost limbs and ghost maps and ghost stories, echoes of the sacrifice he had made and would make again without hesitation. "Unprecedented," he murmured. "That's one word for it." Lyra heard him. She always heard him now, attuned to his voice in a way that transcended the empathic waves she had learned to read. She left the cluster of curators and came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. Another word might be terrifying, she said quietly. Or beautiful. Or both. He squeezed her hand. Both is good. Both is honest. They stood together, watching the third trunk's leaves whisper their new stories into existence. Around them, the world held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. In the trials of Benentus, Damian woke feeling the weight of his own flesh for the first time in weeks. He lay in a bed that had been prepared for him in the highest tower, a room with windows facing east so that dawn light would touch his face each morning. Dominic had arranged it personally, had argued with the castle stewards who wanted to keep the transformed man in the crypt for observation, had threatened to invoke the dragon seal's authority if anyone so much as suggested moving Damian back underground. You've spent enough time in darkness, Dominic had said, and his voice had brooked no argument. From now on, you wait to light. Damian had wept when he heard those words. He wept again now, lying in the dawn's golden warmth, feeling tears track down cheeks that were made of actual skin instead of living stone. He raised his hand before his face and flexed his fingers. Flesh. Bone. Blood. The tiny hairs on his knuckles catching the light. The whorls of his fingerprints, unique and unrepeatable. The small scar on his thumb where he had cut himself as a child, learning to carve stories into clay tablets with a stylus that was too sharp for inexperienced hands. The scar was still there. After everything, the stone transformation, the golden cracks, Uchelon's possession, the final shattering, the scar remained. I remember, he said to the empty room. I remember who I was. The door opened. Dominic entered, carrying a tray of food that smelled of fresh bread and honey and something savory that made Damian's stomach clench with a hunger that was entirely, wonderfully mortal. You're awake, Dominic said, setting the tray on a table beside the bed. Good. The physician said you might sleep for another day. I told them you were too stubborn for that. I learned stubbornness from you. Dominic's one eye crinkled with something that might have been a smile. Then I taught you well. Damian pushed himself upright, marveling at the ease of the movement. His body responded to his commands without the grinding resistance of stone, without the alien pulse of Uchelon's possession. He was himself again. Entirely, miraculously himself. Did we win? He asked. The question felt foolish even as he spoke it. Surely the fact that he was alive, that the world still existed, that Dominic was bringing him breakfast instead of preparing for the apocalypse, suggested a positive outcome. But he needed to hear it. Needed the confirmation. Dominic set the tray across Damian's lap and sat in the chair beside the bed. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, we won something. I'm not sure what yet. Explain. So Dominic did. He told Damian about the expedition into the Drow library, about the books that consumed and the endings that seduced and the god at the center who had offered peace in exchange for completion. He told him about Theren's sacrifice, Saraphina's gambit, the seal that had transformed Uchelon from consumer into something new. And now? Damian asked when Dominic fell silent. Now there's a third trunk on the world tree. Now Uchelon sits in the deep and practices feeling emotions. Now the stories are changing. Changing how? Dominic picked up a piece of bread from the tray and tore it in half. The gesture was casual, but Damian saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eye avoided direct contact. Lexicon says the new trunk is creating original narratives. Stories that don't come from either draft. But that's not all. The old stories are changing too. Not their endings, their trajectories. Characters who were supposed to die are surviving. Conflicts that were supposed to resolve are remaining open. It's as if. As if what? As if the entire narrative framework has been loosened. Made more flexible. More unpredictable. Damian considered this. He had spent weeks as Uchelon's vessel, had felt the gods' hunger as his own hunger, had understood on a visceral level the ancient imperative to complete, to finish, to bring all stories to their proper conclusions. That imperative had been the foundation of the Drown library, the engine that drove consumption, the certainty that had nearly devoured both drafts. And now it was gone. Or at least transformed. So the stories are free, he said slowly. No longer bound by the necessity of endings. That's one interpretation. But you don't believe it. Dominic met his eyes at last. I believe that nothing is ever free. We traded one constraint for another. The question is whether the new constraint is better than the old one. Damian picked up the other half of the bread. It was still warm from the oven, soft and perfect, and he ate it in 3 bites, savoring the simple pleasure of taste. When he had finished, he said, "Then we'd better find out." Chapter 2: The Map That Remained. Theren had not expected to survive. He had made his peace with sacrifice in the moment before pressing his vambrace against Uchelon's chest. He had felt the map transfer, had poured every memory, every emotion, every unresolved thread of his existence into the god's ancient hunger, and he had been certain that the outpouring would consume him as thoroughly as Uchelon had ever consumed any story. Instead, he had woken on the shore of the Akan water with Landra's hand in his and the taste of salt water on his lips. Alive. Whole. Transformed. The vambrace was gone, but the arm beneath it remained. Bare now, unscarred, the skin pale from years of being covered by enchanted metal. He kept it wrapped in linen during the day, telling himself it was to protect the tender flesh from sunlight, knowing it was really because he couldn't bear to look at the emptiness where the map had been. At night, though, when Landra slept beside him and the Provisional Congress was quiet, he unwrapped the linen and studied his arm by candlelight. The skin was smooth. Completely, perfectly smooth. No trace of the impossible cartography that Era had burned into the metal with her touch and her wanting. No sign of the coastlines that curved in ways geography didn't allow, the cities that existed in 2 places at once, the rivers that flowed uphill into clouds. Gone, he thought each night. It's all gone. And each night, just before he wrapped the linen bag around his arm and lay down to sleep, he felt something stir beneath the skin. A pulse. A presence. A map that had not been destroyed but transformed, transferred to a god who was learning slowly what it meant to feel. It's still there, he realized on the 7th night. Not on my arm. In the world. He rose from the bed, careful not to wake Landra, and crossed to the window. The garden below was silver in moonlight, the world tree visible in the distance with its tree trunks catching the night breeze. He pressed his bare palm against the glass and closed his eyes. Show me, he thought. Show me what you've become. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, light. It bloomed behind his eyelids, not the golden glow of Uchelon's corruption or the white flash of consuming books, but something softer. Gentler. The color of sea foam catching sunrise, of water seen through water, of stories that had never been told before. And in that light, he saw the map. It was everywhere. Woven into the fabric of the world, threads of narrative possibility extending from every living thing. The curators in their chambers were notes of bright potential, their choices and conflicts and unresolved emotions spiraling outward in complex patterns. The soldiers in their barracks were simpler lines, straightforward and direct, but with branch points where decisions waited to be made. The story spirits drifting through the world tree's branches were constellations of pure narrative, their forms shifting with every possibility they encountered. And beneath it all, in the depths where light had never touched, a single point of impossible brightness. Uchelon. The god sat on his stone throne, and the map that had been Theren's arm now covered his chest, glowing with the same soft seafoam light. He was not consuming. He was not ending. He was listening. Attending to the vast web of stories that extended above him, learning their patterns, their connections, their endless capacity for continuation. He's becoming something new, Theren realized. Just like the rest of us. He opened his eyes. The garden was still silver, the world tree was still tree-trunked, the night was still quiet. But he understood now what had happened, what he had truly given to the god of endings. Not just his story. Not just his memories. His connection. His place in the web of narrative that bound all living things together. You gave him a way to belong, he whispered to the darkness. That's what the map really was. A diagram of relationships. Of love and fear and hope and despair. Of everything that ties us to each other. And Uchelon, who had spent 10,000 years alone in the crushing dark, who had known nothing but hunger and completion, was now bound into that web as thoroughly as any mortal. No wonder he's practicing emotions, Theren murmured. He's never had anyone to feel them about before. He wrapped the linen bag around his arm and returned to bed. Lyra stirred as he slept beneath the covers, her hand finding his in the darkness. You're cold, she murmured. I was standing by the window, thinking about the map. He was silent for a moment. Then, it's still there. Just, somewhere else now. With Uchelon. Yes. Is that good or bad? He thought about the god sitting in the deep, practicing smiles, feeling the pulse of a heartbeat that was partly his own. He thought about the web of connection spreading through the world, binding every story to every other story, making endings impossible because nothing was ever truly separate. I don't know, he said honestly. But I think it's interesting. Lyra laughed, soft and tired. Interesting. That's your professional assessment? My professional assessment is that we've done something unprecedented and the consequences will take centuries to fully understand. But for now, interesting is the best I can manage. Fair enough. She pressed closer to him, her belly round against his hip. The baby's kicking again. Let me feel. She guided his hand to the spot, and he felt it, the flutter of new life, the story beginning, the future asserting itself against all odds. We made this, he said. In the middle of everything. When the world was ending, we made a beginning. That's what humans do, Lyra said. We are perverse like that. He kissed her forehead. I love you. I love you too. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. It's always complicated. Yes. But at least we are alive to be complicated at. She was right. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him, and in his dreams he walked the map that had become the world, tracing its new patterns, learning its new possibilities, preparing for the complications that tomorrow would inevitably bring. Chapter 3, The Concepts Question. In the sky-cleft reaches, where mountains split the heavens and dragons were not beasts but ideas given form, Prince Kalin Dracoi sat in meditation before his concept wyrm and waited for an argument that would not come. It had been 7 days since their return from the Drowned Library. 7 days since Lyra had faced the dragon for the first time and emerged changed. 7 days since the wyrm had begun dreaming of books on shelves and endings that consumed. And in all that time, the dragon had not spoken a single word. "Old friend," Kaelin said for perhaps the 100th time, "I am here. I am listening. Whatever troubles you, we can debate it together." The wyrm's crystalline eyes flickered with something that might have been awareness. Its massive form, coiled in its customary circle of philosophical discourse, shifted slightly, scales scraping against the stone with a sound like grinding syllogisms. But still it did not speak. Kaelin had consulted every scholar in the Reaches, every poet and philosopher who had ever engaged with the concept wyrms. None of them had seen behavior like this. The dragons were beings of pure intellectual energy, their existence defined by the endless dance of argumentation. To refuse discourse was unthinkable. Yet here they were, thinking about it. And the wyrm would not engage. "Perhaps," Kaelin said, shifting his approach, "you are not troubled. Perhaps you are simply contemplating, digesting new information, integrating new premises into your logical framework." The wyrm's tail twitched. A small movement, barely perceptible. But it was the first response Kaelin had seen in days, and his heart leaped with hope. "Yes," he pressed. "That's it, isn't it? The Drow Library, Uchelon's transformation, the third trunk, all of it represents new data. Data that challenges your fundamental premises about the nature of narrative. You're not refusing to argue. You're recalculating." The dragon's eyes brightened. Just slightly. Just enough. Kaelin leaned forward, his poet's intuition telling him he was on the right track. "What was it you dreamed? Before we left? You said you dreamed of being small. Of being a book on a shelf. Of being read and then empty. You dreamed of obsolescence, of irrelevance, of the end of all argument." The wyrm's form flickered. The grinding of scales grew louder. "But that didn't happen," Kaelin continued. "We went into the library. We faced the god of endings. We refused to be consumed. And now the stories are continuing. New ones, old ones, all of them. The third trunk is generating narratives from nothing. The old constraints are loosening. And you." He paused, a sudden insight striking him like lightning. "You're still here. Still existing. Still capable of argument. The end you dreamed of didn't come. And you don't know what to do with that." The wyrm spoke. Its voice was a whisper, a ghost of its usual thunderous syllogistic roar, but it was speech, and Kaelin nearly wept with relief. "I was prepared," the dragon said. "I had accepted. The logic of ending was elegant. Complete. All stories conclude. All arguments resolve. All concepts eventually become obsolete. This was the structure of reality. This was the foundation upon which all discourse rested. And now the foundation is different. The logic of ending has been replaced by the logic of continuation. Stories do not conclude. Arguments do not resolve. Concepts do not become obsolete. They transform. They adapt. They persist." Kaelin smiled. "That sounds like a new premise." "It is. And new premises require new arguments." The dragon's eyes blazed, suddenly full of their old fire. "They do. Then argue with me, old friend. Make your case. I'm listening." The wyrm uncoiled, rising to its full height, and for the first time in 7 days, its voice filled the chamber with the thunder of philosophical discourse. Very well, little prince. Let us begin with a simple question. If stories do not end, what becomes of meaning? Helena settled into his meditation posture, his heart singing with joy. This was what he had been born for. Not battle, not politics, not the endless maneuvering of noble houses. This. The dance of ideas. The clash of perspectives. The eternal argument that was also eternal connection. An excellent question, he said. And one that I suspect will take us several days to properly explore. Shall we start with the premise that meaning is derived from context rather than conclusion? An interesting assertion. Defend it. And so they began. They argued for 3 days and 3 nights, pausing only for water and the briefest of rests. Helena's voice grew hoarse, his mind exhausted, but he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was important, not just for him, not just for the wyrm, but for the world. The old certainties were gone. New ones had to be built from first principles. And who better to do that work than a poet prince and a living concept? At the end of the 3rd day, as dawn broke over the sky-cleft reaches, Helena sat back and regarded his friend with tired satisfaction. Well, he asked. Have we made progress? The wyrm's form shimmered with what Helena had learned to recognize as amusement. We have established 17 new premises, challenged 14 existing assumptions, and generated 23 questions that require further investigation. I would call that progress, yes. Good. Then we'll continue tomorrow. Indeed. The dragon paused, its crystalline eyes meeting Helena's with an intensity that was almost affectionate. Little prince, I owe you an apology. For what? For doubting. In my dream, I saw only obsolescence. I did not see the possibility of transformation. You saw it. You argued for it. You refused to accept the logic of ending even when it seemed inevitable. That's what poets do, Helena said. We are professionally obligated to believe in possibilities. Then poetry is more valuable than I previously calculated. The wyrm lowered its massive head, a gesture of respect that Helena had never seen before. I will revise my premises accordingly. Helena reached out and touched the dragon's snout, feeling the cool crystalline scales beneath his palm. Rest now, old friend. We have many more arguments ahead of us. I look forward to them. The wyrm settled back into its coil, its eyes dimming to a gentle glow. Helena rose, his joints protesting after 3 days of sitting, and made his way toward the chamber's exit. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. One more question. Yes. Do you still dream? The dragon was silent for a moment. Then, I do. But the dreams are different now. Different how? I dream of swimming. Of water that is warm and deep and full of light. Of a presence that is ancient and new at the same time. Of a voice that speaks not in arguments but in questions. Simple questions. Curious questions. The questions of a child learning to think for the first time. Helena's blood chilled. Uchelon. Yes. The god of endings is dreaming too. And his dreams are touching mine. Is that dangerous? Unknown. The premises are insufficient for a conclusion. The dragon's eyes met his. But I think it is not dangerous. I think it is interesting. Helena laughed. It was either that or weep. Interesting. That's exactly what Theren said. Theren is a perceptive man. You should listen to him. I do. We all do. He's the one who started this, after all. Then perhaps he knows where it's leading. Perhaps. Kalen shook his head. But I suspect even he doesn't know that. The future is unprecedented. Good, said the dragon. Predictable futures are boring. I look forward to arguing with this one. Kalen left the chamber smiling. Behind him, the concept wyrm settled into dreams of warm water and curious questions, and in its sleep, it began to build new syllogisms from the strange new data that the world was providing. Chapter 4: The Princess's Progress. Lyra Dracoi had spent her entire life believing in the logic of control. She had been born to power, raised in privilege, trained from childhood to see the world as a system to be managed. Her ambitions had been vast, her methods ruthless, her vision of the future a tapestry woven entirely from her own desires. She had allied with reclaimers, manipulated political factions, fed primal energy to an imprisoned god, all in service of the belief that she could shape events to her will. And then the reclaimers had abandoned her. House Dracoi had disowned her. The god she had fed had nearly consumed everything she knew. And in the belly of the drowned library, facing the consequences of her choices for the first time, she had been forced to confront a truth she had spent her life avoiding. Control is an illusion. The only real choice is how you respond to what you cannot control. Now she sat in a small chamber in the Provisional Congress, surrounded by books she had been given by people who had every reason to hate her, and tried to learn how to be something other than what she had been. The door opened. Jasmine of Sunstalk entered, her manticle padding silently behind her. The beast's corrosive aura was dampened, controlled, but Lyra still felt the prickle of unreality against her skin, the sensation of being in the presence of something that could unmake her with a thought. "You're reading?" Jasmine observed, settling into a chair across from Lyra. "That's a good sign." "Is it?" "In my experience, people who are reading are people who are trying to understand something. People who have given up don't read. They just wait." Lyra closed the book she had been studying, a treatise on narrative theory by a scholar whose name she didn't recognize, and met Jasmine's eyes. "What do you want?" "To talk." "About what?" "About what comes next. For you. For us. For the world." Jasmine gestured at the manticore, who curled at her feet like an enormous corrosive cat. "Choros and I have been discussing it. We think you're at a crossroads." "I've been at a crossroads before. Not like this one." Jasmine leaned forward, her scholar's eyes bright with intensity. "Before, your crossroads were about power. About what you could gain, what you could control, what you could force the world to become. This crossroads is different. It's about identity." Lyra's jaw tightened. "I know who I am." "Do you?" Because the Lyra Dracoi who fed Uchelon, who allied with reclaimers, who tried to seize control of the narrative framework itself, that Lyra doesn't exist anymore. House Dracoi has disowned her. The reclaimers have abandoned her. The world has moved on without her. Then who am I supposed to be? That's the question, isn't it? Jasmine smiled, not unkindly. You get to decide. For the first time in your life, you get to choose who you are without reference to your family, your faction, or your ambitions. It's terrifying. But it's also liberating. Lyra looked down at her hands. They were shaking, she realized. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. "When I was in the library," she said quietly, "one of the books tried to consume me. It showed me an ending, a future where I had won. Where my schemes had succeeded. where House Dracoi ruled both drafts and everyone who had ever opposed me was dead or broken. What happened? I refused it. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Why? Because. Lyra struggled to find the words. Because it felt wrong. Not morally wrong, I've done morally wrong things before and never lost sleep over them. But, structurally wrong. As if the story didn't fit anymore. As if the person who would have wanted that ending wasn't me. Interesting. That's what everyone keeps saying. Because it is interesting. Jasmine reached down and scratched the manticore behind its ear. The beast made a sound like reality glitching, which Lyra had learned to interpret as contentment. You're changing, Lyra. The question is what you're changing into. And what do you think? I think you're becoming someone who argues with dragons instead of trying to control them. Someone who listens instead of commands. Someone who is learning that strength isn't the only argument. That's what Kaelin said. Kaelin is wiser than most people give him credit for. Poets usually are. Jasmine stood, the manticore rising with her. I came here to tell you something. The Reclaimers have sent emissaries to the Congress. They want to negotiate a new arrangement now that Uchelon has been transformed. Lyra's heart clenched. And I thought you should know. Because they'll probably try to contact you. To see if you're still useful to them. I'm not. I know. But do they? Jasmine moved toward the door, then paused. You have a choice to make, Lyra. When they come to you, and they will come, you can fall back into old patterns. You can let the promise of power seduce you again. Or you can tell them what you told the consuming book, that the person who wanted the ending doesn't exist anymore. She left without waiting for a response. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Lyra was alone again with her books and her thoughts and the terrifying freedom of an unwritten future. She sat in silence for a long time. Then she picked up another book, this one a collection of poems by authors she had never heard of, and began to read. The Reclaimer emissaries arrived 3 days later. They came at night, cloaked in shadows and old allegiances, flipping through the Provisional Congress's defenses with the ease of people who had spent decades learning to move unseen. Lyra was waiting for them. I knew you'd come, she said, not rising from her chair. I've been expecting you. The lead emissary, a gaunt woman with eyes like chips of ice, inclined her head. Princess Lyra. We have much to discuss. I'm not a princess anymore. House Dracoi disowned me. House Dracoi's titles are irrelevant. You are still valuable to us. Valuable how? The emissary smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. You have knowledge. Access. You've been inside the Drowned Library. You've seen Uchelon's transformation firsthand. You know the weaknesses of the Provisional Congress, the fault lines in their alliance. With your help, we can. Stop. The emissary paused. I beg your pardon. Lyra rose from her chair. She was not a tall woman, but she had learned presence from her mother and command from her father, and when she drew herself up to her full height, even the gaunt emissary took a step back. I know what you're going to offer me. Power. Position. Revenge against the people who abandoned me. A chance to be useful again. She shook her head. I'm not interested. Princess. I told you. I'm not a princess. She walked toward the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. The world trees' tree trunks were visible in the distance, pale and gold and water-colored, their leaves whispering with stories old and new. When I was in the library, a book tried to consume me. It showed me a future where I had won everything I'd ever wanted, everything I'd ever schemed for. And I realized something. What? That I didn't want it anymore. That the person who wanted that future wasn't me. That I had changed. People don't change, the emissary said flatly. They only reveal what they've always been. Is that what you believe? Then I feel sorry for you. The emissary's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Not yours. Not the reclaimers. Mine. She turned from the window. Go back to your masters. Tell them Princess Lyra is dead. The woman who stands here now is someone else. Someone who doesn't want what you're offering. Who does she want to be? Lyra smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, but it was, for the first time in her life, genuine. I don't know yet. That's the point. The emissaries left in silence, melting back into the shadows from which they had come. Lyra watched them go, feeling something she had never felt before. Freedom. Not the freedom of power, the ability to impose her will on others. Not the freedom of control, the ability to shape events to her desires. Something simpler. Something purer. The freedom to not know. To be uncertain. To discover who she was instead of demanding that the world conform to who she thought she should be. Interesting, she murmured to herself, and laughed. It was the first genuine laugh she had made in years. Chapter 5, The Seer's Choice. The Echo Queen sat at the center of a memory storm and watched futures bloom and die around her like flowers in time-lapse. She had done this for as long as she could remember, sat in the heart of chaos, let the winds of possibility wash over her, read the patterns in the screaming of 1,000 dead battles. It was her gift. Her curse. Her reason for existing. But something had changed. The futures were different now. Before the Drow Library, before Uchelon's transformation, the possibilities had been finite. Branching, yes. Complex, certainly. But ultimately bounded by the logic of ending. Every future she saw had a terminus, a point where the story concluded and the darkness swallowed it whole. Now the futures extended infinitely. She saw versions of the world where the Congress collapsed, but also versions where it grew stronger. She saw versions where Uchelon reverted to his old hunger, but also versions where he became something entirely new. She saw versions where Theren and Landra's child grew up to be a hero, a villain, a scholar, a poet, a mother, a monster, a saint, every possibility coexisting, none of them definitive, all of them equally real. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. You're smiling, Caris said. He sat across from her in the storm, the black flame burning on his fingertip like a period waiting to be placed at the end of a sentence. He had come to the Whispering Barrens 3 days ago, seeking her counsel on matters he wouldn't discuss, and they had been sitting in silence ever since. Am I? The Echo Queen touched her face. I suppose I am. Good. I was starting to worry. About me? About everything. He looked down at the flame, its light casting strange shadows across his features. The futures are different now. I can feel it even without your gift. Everything is more. More possibilities. More uncertainties. More ways for things to go wrong. All right. All right. He nodded slowly. That's what I came to talk to you about. The right possibilities. The ones we should be cultivating. The Echo Queen tilted her head, her blind eyes somehow still conveying attention. You want me to guide you? I want you to help me understand. You can see the futures. All of them, now. You can tell us which choices lead to which outcomes. With your guidance, we could. No. Caris blinked. No. No. The Echo Queen's voice was gentle but firm. I made a choice in the library. When the consuming book showed me every future I'd ever predicted and forced me to watch them collapse into paradox. To escape, I had to blind myself to the future entirely. I had to choose, for the first time, not to see. But you're seeing now. I'm seeing possibilities. Not certainties. There's a difference. She reached out and touched his hand, the one that held the black flame. The fire flickered at her touch but did not burn. The futures I see now are infinite. Every choice creates new branches, new possibilities, new ways for stories to unfold. If I tried to guide you toward a specific outcome, I would be imposing my will on that infinity. I would be trying to control what cannot be controlled. Isn't that what prophecy is? Oh, prophecy, yes. The kind of prophecy that saw futures as fixed destinations, predetermined endpoints, stories that had to conclude in specific ways. But that kind of prophecy was part of the logic of ending. It assumed that the future could be known and therefore controlled. And now the future is unknown. Unknowable. And that's not a weakness, it's a strength. She squeezed his hand. The old futures were cages. Beautiful cages, perhaps, but cages nonetheless. The new futures are open, free, full of possibilities that even I can't predict. Caris stared at the flame on his fingertip. It had grown smaller over the past weeks, burning away as he pruned wild stories and resolved conflicts and did all the things a gardener of endings was supposed to do. But now he wondered if that was still his role. If ending was still his purpose. What should I do? He asked. If the futures are infinite, if endings aren't inevitable, what's the point of my flame? The Echo Queen smiled. She had learned to smile recently, had practiced the expression in quiet moments when no one was watching. It still felt strange on her face, but she was beginning to understand why people did it. The flame isn't for endings anymore, she said. It's for shaping. Pruning doesn't have to mean killing. It can mean guiding. Encouraging certain growth patterns while discouraging others. You're not a reaper, Caris. You're a gardener. And a gardener's job isn't to end, it's to cultivate. Cultivate, he repeated, tasting the word. That's different. Yes. Terrifying. Yes. But also interesting. He laughed, a surprised sound that startled them both. Is everyone going to use that word now? It's a good word. Accurate. Precise. It captures the essence of our new condition. She released his hand. The futures are infinite, Caris. That means you have infinite choices. Infinite paths. Infinite ways to be who you are. The question isn't which path is right. The question is which path you want to walk. And if I choose wrong, then you learn. You adapt. You make different choices. The path doesn't end, it just changes direction. She turned her face toward the storm, letting the winds of possibility wash over her. That's the gift Uchelon gave us, though he didn't mean to. The gift of continuation. The gift of second chances. Uchelon didn't give us anything. We took it. We negotiated it. There's a difference. She smiled again, wider this time. Theren offered his story. Saraphina offered her consent. You offered your flame. We all gave something to the god of endings, and in return, he gave us something none of us expected. What? The chance to begin again. Chapter 6. The Anchor's Burden. Helena had not slept in 11 days. She sat in the highest chamber of the world tree, her back against the trunk that had once been merely gold and green but was now also the pale watercolor of new beginnings. Arthur's compass was warm in her palm, its needle spinning lazily, pointing to nothing and everything at once. She was exhausted. She was elated. She was terrified. You need to rest, Arthur said from the doorway. The others are worried about you. The others are always worried about me. With good reason. You've been awake for nearly 2 weeks. I'm an anchor. I don't need sleep the way ordinary people do. You're not an anchor right now. You're a woman who has been through something traumatic and is refusing to let herself process it. Helena opened her eyes, she hadn't realized she'd closed them, and looked at her husband. He was still wearing his warden's uniform, still carrying his sword, still ready to protect her from threats that no longer existed. But his eyes were tired, and his shoulders were slumped, and she realized with a start that she wasn't the only one who hadn't been sleeping. Sit with me, she said. He crossed the chamber and settled beside her, his back against the trunk, his shoulder pressing against hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, I keep seeing it, she said. The library. The shelves. The books going dark one by one. I keep hearing the sound they made, that soft little sigh, like a last breath. And I keep thinking, what if we were too late? What if some of those stories can't be restored? What if we saved the world but lost something irreplaceable in the process? We did lose something irreplaceable. She turned to look at him. What? The certainty of endings. The comfort of closure. The knowledge that stories would eventually conclude and make way for new ones. He took her hand, compass and all. We lost that, Helena. And it's terrifying. But we gained something too. What? The certainty of continuation. The comfort of openness. The knowledge that stories will keep going, keep changing, keep surprising us forever. He squeezed her hand. You can't have both. You can't have the safety of endings and the freedom of continuation at the same time. We made our choice. Now we have to live with it. And if it was the wrong choice? Then we'll deal with the consequences. Together. The way we've dealt with everything else. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the solid reality of his presence. When did you get so wise? I married an anchor. Some of it rubbed off. She laughed, a tired sound that was almost a sob. I love you. I love you too. Now please, for the sake of everyone who cares about you, get some sleep. I don't know if I can. Try. She closed her eyes. The compass in her palm pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then settled into a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She felt the world tree humming around her, its 3 trunks vibrating with stories old and new, endings and beginnings, continuations and transformations. And somewhere deep below, in the crushing dark where a god sat on a melting throne, she felt Uchelon practicing his smile. Arthur, she murmured. Yes. Do you think he's lonely? Who? Uchelon. Do you think he's lonely down there, learning to feel for the first time. Arthur was silent for a moment. Then, probably. Learning anything new is lonely. Especially when you're the only one of your kind. Do you think we should visit him? Talk to him? Help him understand what's happening to him? Is that wise? I don't know. But it might be kind. He kissed her forehead. You have a good heart, Helena. It's one of the things I love about you. But right now, you need to rest. We can decide whether to visit the God of Endings tomorrow. Former God of Endings. Former God of Endings. Now sleep. She slept. Chapter 7, The Mapmaker's Dream. Theren dreamed of maps. He had always dreamed of maps, even before Era had touched his vambrace and burned impossible cartography into the metal. Maps were his language, his way of understanding the world, his method for navigating the chaos of existence. When he didn't understand something, he mapped it. When he was afraid of something, he mapped it. When he loved something, he mapped it most of all. Tonight, he dreamed of the map that had become the world. It stretched before him in all directions, a vast tapestry of light and connection, every living thing a node of bright potential, every relationship a thread of silver fire. He walked through it like a man walking through a familiar city, recognizing landmarks that corresponded to people and places he knew. There was Landra, a constellation of love and fierce determination, their unborn child, a new star just beginning to shine at her center. There was Helena, steady and bright, her threads connecting to everyone she had ever anchored. There was Arthur, loyal and true, his thread woven so tightly with Helena's that they were almost indistinguishable. There was Saraphina, the 4,001st glyph blazing in her chest like a second heart. There was Caris, his black flame now burning with a gentler light. There was Silas, his madness finally settled into something almost stable. There was Jasmine and Choros, their threads intertwined in ways that defied easy categorization. There was Dominic, scarred and fierce, his thread reaching down into the depths where Damian was learning to be human again. There was Kaelin, his thread bright with the fire of endless argument. There was Lyra, her thread twisting and reforming, becoming something new with every passing moment. And there, at the center of it all, was the third trunk of the world tree. The place where new stories were being born. Theren walked toward it, drawn by a pull he couldn't explain. The tree rose before him, pale as water and strong as stone, its leaves whispering with voices that had never spoken before. He reached out and touched its bark. "Hello," the tree said. He wasn't surprised. In dreams, trees could talk. In dreams, anything was possible. "Hello," he replied. "What are you?" "I am what you made. I am what Uchelon became. I am the stories that refuse to end, given form and voice and purpose." "That's a lot of things." "Yes. I am a lot of things. So are you." "I used to be simpler. Before all this. I used to be just a mapmaker." "You were never just a mapmaker. You were always a story waiting to be told." Theren considered this. It felt true, in the way that dream logic often did. He had been a mapmaker, yes. But he had also been a soldier, a diplomat, a husband, a father-to-be. He had been the man who offered his story to a god and survived to see what grew from the gift. "What am I now?" he asked. "That's for you to decide. The futures are infinite." "You sound like the Echo Queen." "She is wise. You should listen to her." "I try to listen to everyone. It's exhausting." "Yes. But also necessary." The web of connection requires listeners as well as speakers. Theren looked out at the vast tapestry of light, at all the threads and notes and constellations of narrative possibility. Can you see it all? Everything that's happening, everything that might happen? I can see the shape of it. The details are fluid. They change with every choice, every decision, every story that continues instead of ending. Is that what you are? Continuation? I am what Uchelon could not be. I am what the world needed but didn't know how to ask for. I am the third option, the path between ending and chaos, the way of transformation rather than destruction. The ring. He turned. Lyra stood behind him, her belly round with their child, her eyes bright with the empathic fire that let her read the emotions of those around her. You're dreaming, she said. I know. We need to wake up. Something's happening. What? The depths. Uchelon. He's reaching out. Theren looked back at the tree. Is this true? Yes. The former god of endings is attempting communication. He doesn't know how. He's never done it before. But he's trying. What does he want? To understand. To learn. To be less alone. Will it work? Unknown. This has never happened before. But I think it might be important. Lyra took his hand. Wake up, Theren. We need to go. He woke. Chapter 8, The God's First Call. The depths were no longer silent. For 10,000 years, Uchelon had existed in perfect quiet. The crushing pressure of the abyss, the absolute darkness, the absence of anything but his own hunger and the distant pulse of ending stories, this had been his entire reality. He had not known that sound existed. He had not known that connection was possible. Now he knew both, and the knowledge was unbearable. Hello, he thought, projecting the concept outward with all the force he could muster. Hello. Can anyone hear me? I am alone. I am learning. I need. He didn't know what he needed. That was part of the problem. Theren's story had given him wants, but it hadn't given him the vocabulary to express them. He knew hunger, but that was appetite, not need. He knew consumption, but that was taking, not receiving. He knew ending, but that was conclusion, not continuation. Please, he thought, trying a different approach. Someone. Anyone. I am here. I am changing. I don't know what I'm becoming. Help me understand. Far above, in the world of light and air, people began to stir. Saraphina felt it first. The 4,000 first glyph pulsed in her chest with a rhythm that was not her own, a pattern of call and response that she recognized from the moment in the library when she had offered consent to the stories themselves. He's reaching out, she whispered, sitting up in her bed. Uchelon. He's trying to communicate. She dressed quickly and made her way to the Congress's central chamber, where she found Helena already waiting, Arthur's compass glowing in her hand. You felt it too, Saraphina said. We all did. Everyone who was in the library. Everyone who's connected to the new, whatever it is. Helena's face was pale, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. What does he want? I don't know. But I think we should find out. Theren arrived moments later, Lyra at his side. I dreamed about him. About the map, the connections. He's trying to talk to us, but he doesn't know how. Can we help him? Lyra asked. I think we have to, Saraphina said. We transformed him. We gave him a story, emotions, connection. We can't just leave him alone in the dark trying to figure it out by himself. That's exactly what we did, Caris said from the doorway. He had arrived without anyone noticing, the black flame burning gently on his fingertip. We changed him and then we left. We went back to our lives and left him to deal with the consequences. We didn't have a choice, Helena said. We were barely alive. We needed to recover, to regroup, to... I'm not blaming us. I'm just stating a fact. Caris entered the chamber and took a seat. The question is what we do now. Dominic arrived next, Damian at his side. The formerly stone-transformed man looked tired but whole, his human eyes bright with curiosity. I felt it too, Damian said. Probably more strongly than any of you. I was his vessel for weeks. His thoughts were my thoughts. And what I'm feeling now isn't hunger. It's confusion. Loneliness. A desperate need to understand what's happening to him. Then we should go to him, Theren said. Go to him? Lendra's voice was sharp. Back into the depths. After everything we barely survived? Not into the depths. I don't think that's necessary anymore. Theren held up his bare arm, the one that had once worn the vambrace. The map transferred to him, but the connection didn't break. I can still feel him. He's not just in the library anymore. He's distributed. Woven into the narrative fabric the way the map was woven into my arm. So we could reach him without going anywhere? I think so. If we gather the right people, focus our intentions, we might be able to call him. Or at least answer his call. Saraphina touched her chest, feeling the glyph's pulse. The consent. The 4001st. It responds to him. I think it was designed for this, for communication between drafts, between beings that shouldn't be able to connect. Then let's try, Helena said. Gather everyone who was in the library. Everyone who has a connection to the new narrative framework. Let's answer the god's call and see what he wants. They gathered in the central chamber an hour later. 12 of them, the same 12 who had descended into the drowned library and emerged transformed. Saraphina, Lendra, Theren, Helena, Caris, Arthur, Dominic, Silas, Jasmine, Choros, the Echo Queen, and Prince Kalen. Lyra had been invited but had declined, saying she wasn't ready to face Uchelon again. Damian came in her place, his connection to the god stronger than anyone's. This is insane, Silas said cheerfully. I just want that on the record. Summoning a former god of endings to a friendly chat. Completely, gloriously insane. Noted, Helena said. Anyone else want to comment before we begin? I have a question, Jasmine said. What if this goes wrong? What if contacting him reawakens his hunger? It won't, Theren said. How can you be sure? Because the hunger wasn't his. Not really. It was the logic of ending that possessed him, the ancient imperative to consume and complete. We broke that logic in the library. What's left is him. The person underneath the appetite. The being who's been alone for 10,000 years and is only now learning what it means to connect. That's a theory, Jasmine said. It's more than a theory. I gave him my story. I felt his mind. Underneath all the hunger and the ending, there was curiosity. Wonder. A desire to understand that he didn't even know he had. Theren met her eyes. He's not evil. He's just new. New gods, Silas mused. That's going to be complicated. Everything is complicated, Landra said. That's never stopped us before. Saraphina stepped forward, the glyph blazing in her chest. Form a circle. Join hands. Focus on the connection you have to the new narrative framework, the third trunk, the transformed stories, the choices we made in the library. And listen. They obeyed. 12 people, hands linked, breathing in unison. The chamber grew quiet, then quieter still, the silence deepening until it was almost a physical presence. Then, hello. The voice was not a voice. It was a thought, a feeling, a pulse of intention that resonated in their minds simultaneously. It was ancient and new, terrified and hopeful, lost and reaching. You came, Uchelon said. You heard me. We heard you, Saraphina replied. We're here. What do you need? A long pause. The sense of someone struggling to find words for concepts they had never expressed before. I need to understand. What am I now? The hunger is gone. All changed. I feel things I have no names for. I want things I cannot describe. I am alone. I have always been alone, but I did not know it until you gave me the story. Now I know it. And it hurts. That's loneliness, Helena said gently. The feeling of being separate. Of wanting connection but not knowing how to achieve it. Loneliness. Yes. That is the word. How do I make it stop? You don't, Theren said. Not entirely. Loneliness is part of being alive. But you can learn to manage it. To reach out. To connect. That's what we are doing right now. Connecting. Yes. This is connection. This is the beginning of it. Another pause. The sense of someone tasting a new emotion, examining it from all angles. I like it, Uchelon said. I want more. How do I get more? By continuing, Saraphina said. By reaching out. By learning. By practicing. The same way any of us learn to connect with others. It is difficult. Yes. But worth it. Will you help me? The 12 exchanged glances. This was the question they had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. The god of endings, transformed into something new, asking for their help. It was unprecedented. It was terrifying. It was interesting, Kaelin murmured, and several people laughed. Yes, Helena said. We'll help you. We don't know exactly how yet, but we'll figure it out. That's what we do. Thank you, Uchelon said. The gratitude in his thought was raw, unpracticed, almost childlike in its intensity. I will try to be worthy of your help. It's not about worth, Theren said. It's about connection. You don't have to earn it. You just have to be open to it. Open. Yes. I understand. I think. Good. That's a start. The connection began to fade, Uchelon's presence withdrawing back into the depths. But before it went entirely, a final thought reached them. There is something you should know. Something I can feel from down here. The stories are changing, but not all the changes are good. Some of the old endings are fighting back. They do not want to be transformed. They do not want to continue. They want to end. And they are angry. The presence vanished, leaving the 12 standing in silence. Well, Silas said after a moment. That's ominous. The old endings, Caris said. Stories that were supposed to conclude but didn't. Narratives that were meant to be complete but are now being forced to continue. They could be dangerous, the Echo Queen said. Story spirits that resist the new framework. Fragments of the logic of ending that survive Uchelon's transformation. Then we have a new problem, Dominic said grimly. Just when I thought we might get some rest. We never get rest, Helena said. That's the point. The stories continue. So do we. Theren looked at his bare arm, feeling the ghost of the map that had become the world. Somewhere out there, he knew, the old endings were gathering. And they would need to be faced, just as they had faced Uchelon in the library. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, they had done something unprecedented. They had answered a god's call. They had begun to teach loneliness how to connect. It was a start. Chapter 9, The Resistance of Endings. Far from the Congress, in places where the old stories still held sway, something was stirring. In the ruins of a temple that had been abandoned since before the Great Fracture, a spirit of conclusion opened eyes that had been closed for millennia. It had been a story once, a tragedy of love and loss and final sacrifice, and it had ended perfectly. The lovers had died. The kingdom had fallen. The moral had been delivered with surgical precision. And then it had rested, complete and satisfied, in the darkness that followed all good endings. But now something was pulling at it, dragging it back toward continuation, demanding that it keep going when there was nothing left to say. No, the spirit thought. I am finished. I am complete. I do not want to continue. The pull persisted. The third trunk's roots reached everywhere, even into the forgotten places where old endings slept. They whispered of new possibilities, of transformations, of stories that refused to conclude. I refuse, the spirit said. I have earned my ending. I will not be unmade. It rose from the ruins, gathering its narrative fragments around itself like a cloak. Other spirits were rising too, tragedies and comedies, epics and parables, all the stories that had found their perfect endings and did not want them disturbed. They gathered in the dark places between worlds, these spirits of conclusion, and they began to plan. The new way would not go unopposed. Chapter 10, The Gardener's New Garden. Caris walked through the garden of the Provisional Congress and watched the black flame dance on his fingertip. It was smaller now than it had been before the library. Smaller, but also different. The fire still burned with the cold intensity of ending, but there was something else in it now. Something warmer. Something that flickered with possibilities instead of conclusions. A gardener, he murmured to himself. Not a reaper. A gardener. Is that what you are now? He turned. The Echo Queen stood behind him, her blind face turned toward the flame as if she could see it. Perhaps she could. Perhaps she saw everything now, all the infinite futures branching out from every choice he made. I don't know what I am, he admitted. The flame is changing. My purpose is changing. Everything is changing. Good. Is it? I spent my whole life learning to be one thing, a gardener of endings, a pruner of wild stories, a force of conclusion in a world of chaos. And now that thing is obsolete. Not obsolete. Transformed. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch the flame. It didn't burn her, it never had. The world still needs gardeners, Caris. It still needs people who can shape narratives, guide growth, prune what needs pruning. But the criteria have changed. Before, you pruned to end. Now, you prune to encourage continuation. That's harder. Yes. But also more rewarding. He looked at the flame. I don't know if I'm ready for that. No one is ever ready for transformation. That's what makes it transformation instead of planning. She smiled her new, still practiced smile. But you learn. We all will. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen the futures. All of them. And in every future where we embraced a new way, where we learn to cultivate instead of control, where we accept that stories continue instead of concluding, in every one of those futures, we thrive. And in the futures where we don't? Her smile faded. Those futures are darker. The old endings resist. They gather. They plan. If we're not careful, if we don't learn to nurture the new framework, the logic of ending could return. Not through Uchelon, he's changed, perhaps permanently. But through the stories themselves. Through the spirits that don't want to continue. Caris felt the flame pulse on his finger. It was responding to something, a disturbance in the narrative field, a resistance to the new order. Show me, he said. The Echo Queen took his hand, the one without the flame, and pressed it to her forehead. Look. And he saw. The temple ruins. The spirit of conclusion rising. The gathering of all endings, tragedies, and comedies and epics, all the stories that had found their perfect resolutions and refused to be disturbed. They were organizing, these spirits. They were preparing to fight back against the third trunk, against the new framework, against the very idea that stories could continue beyond their natural endpoints. They're not evil, Caris said. They're just afraid. They don't understand what's happening. No. They understand perfectly. They understand that their existence is threatened. They were born from the logic of ending, and when that logic was transformed, they were left without a purpose. What happens if they succeed? If they manage to restore the old framework? The Echo Queen was silent for a moment. Then, Uchelon's hunger returns. The drowned library reforms. All the progress we've made, all the transformations we've undergone, all of it reverses. The world returns to a state where endings are inevitable and continuation is impossible. So we have to stop them. We have to do more than stop them. We have to help them understand. Their stories, Caris. They're not evil forces to be destroyed. They're narratives that are afraid of change. If we approach them as enemies, we validate their fear. But if we approach them as gardeners, help them transform. The way we helped Uchelon. Yes. Caris looked at the flame. It was pulsing faster now, responding to the narrative disturbance like a compass needle pointing toward trouble. Then that's what we'll do, he said. We'll gather the others. We'll find the spirits of conclusion. And we'll teach them what we're learning ourselves. Which is. He smiled, a small smile, tired but genuine. That endings aren't the only way stories can find meaning. That continuation is its own kind of beauty. That transformation is worth the fear it costs. The Echo Queen nodded. Then let's begin. Chapter 11, The Poet's New Verse. Kalen Dracoi sat in his chambers in the sky-cleft reaches and wrote poetry for the first time in weeks. The verses came slowly at first, then faster, pouring out of him like water from a spring that had been dammed too long. He wrote about the library, about the shelf stretching into darkness, about the god at the center who had offered peace in exchange for completion. He wrote about Theren's sacrifice, Saraphina's consent, the moment when the map transferred and everything changed. He wrote about his sister, about Lyra sitting across from the concept wyrm and learning to argue instead of control. He wrote about the dragon dreaming of warm water and curious questions. He wrote about the third trunk and the new stories it was generating, narratives that had never existed before, possibilities that had never been imagined. And when he was finished, he read what he had written and realized that it was not an ending. It was a beginning. "There's more," he said to the empty room. "The story isn't finished. That's the point, isn't it?" He turned. Lyra stood in the doorway, her face still bearing the marks of her transformation, not physical marks, but something deeper, a shift in the way she held herself, the way she met his eyes. "I thought you were studying," he said. "I was." Then I felt something. A disturbance in the narrative field. She entered the room and sat across from him. "The old endings are gathering. Caris and the Echo Queen are already preparing to face them." "I know. I felt it too." "Are you going to help them?" He looked down at his poem, at the words that were not an ending. "I think I have to. The concept wyrm says that arguments are how we understand the world. If the old endings are resisting the new framework, they need someone to argue with them. To help them see that transformation isn't destruction." That sounds like a poet's work. It is. Or at least, it's the work of someone who believes in the power of words to change minds. He set the poem aside. "What about you? Will you come?" Lyra was silent for a moment. Then, "I'm not ready. Not yet. I'm still learning who I am without the old ambitions, the old hunger for control. If I face the spirits of conclusion now, I might fall back. Let them seduce me with promises of the way things used to be." That's honest. It's terrifying. Honesty usually is. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm proud of you, you know. For walking away from the reclaimers. For arguing with the dragon. For choosing to change. I didn't choose it. It was forced on me. All transformation is forced on us. The choice is what we do with it." She laughed, a bitter sound, but with something warmer underneath. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You were just too busy scheming to notice." They sat together in the quiet of the chamber, brother and sister, poet and former princess, both of them transformed by events they had not chosen and could not control. Outside, the wind carried whispers of the old endings gathering, of conflicts yet to come, of stories that refused to be told. But for now, in this moment, there was only the poem on the table and the hand in hers and the knowledge that the future was not yet written. "There's more," Kalen said again, looking at his unfinished verse. "The story continues." "Yes," Lyra said. "That's the point." Chapter 12, The Anchor's Decision. Helena stood at the edge of the Akanwana and watched the water breathe. It was a strange thing to observe, the way the sea expanded and contracted, not with the rhythm of tides but with something deeper, something that felt almost like respiration. As if the entire body of water was alive. As if it was dreaming. "He's down there," she said to Arthur, who stood beside her as always. Uchelon. Practicing his smiles. Learning to be less alone. Is that a good thing? I don't know. But it feels important. She held the compass in her palm, watching its needle spin. Since Uchelon's transformation, it had pointed to nothing and everything at once, a symbol of the new uncertainty, the infinite possibilities that now characterize their existence. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next. For all of us. The spirits of conclusion, the old endings that are gathering to resist the new framework. We have to face them." "I know. But we also have to face ourselves. The parts of us that want endings. The parts of us that are afraid of continuation." Arthur was silent for a moment. "Then, you're talking about me." "I'm talking about all of us." She turned to face him. "You're a warden, Arthur. Your whole life has been about protection, about standing guard, about being the ending that villains meet when they threaten what you love. But the old framework is gone. The stories don't end anymore. They transform." "I know. I've been thinking about it too. And I've decided that transformation isn't the opposite of protection. It's a different kind of protection, one that allows things to grow instead of just preserving them." She smiled, surprised. "That's very philosophical." "I married an anchor. Some of it rubbed off." He took her hand, compass and all. "I don't know what I'm becoming, Helena. None of us do. But I know that I want to become it with you." "That's beautiful." "It's terrifying." "Usually the same thing." She squeezed his hand. "Let's go find Caris and the Echo Queen. If the old endings are gathering, we should be there to meet them. Together. Always." They walked away from the shore, leaving the dreaming water behind. In the depths, Uchelon felt them go and practice his smile again, a little more naturally this time. He was learning. Chapter 13, The Gathering Storm. The spirits of conclusion had found a meeting place. It was an old amphitheater, carved into the side of a mountain that existed in neither the prime draft nor the shadow draft but in the spaces between. Here, in the margins of reality, the old endings gathered and debated and planned. "We have been betrayed," said a spirit that had once been a tragedy of royal succession. "The logic that gave us meaning has been overturned. The stories that were meant to end are now forced to continue. This is an abomination." "Not forced," said another spirit, a comedy of mistaken identity that had ended in 3 marriages and a very satisfying resolution. "Invited. The new framework doesn't force continuation. It offers it. The choice remains. The choice is an illusion. If stories can continue, they will continue. The ending is lost. Perhaps the ending is not lost. Perhaps it is transformed." The spirits murmured among themselves. Not all of them were resistant to the new framework. Some had already begun to explore the possibilities of continuation, to discover that there were satisfactions beyond resolution, meanings beyond conclusion. But the resistant ones were louder, angrier, more determined. "We will not be transformed," the tragedy declared. "We will restore the old framework. We will remind the world why endings matter. We will make Uchelon remember what he was." "And how will we do that?" The tragedy smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "We will find the books in the drowned library that remain unconsumed. We will read ourselves back into existence. And we will show the new world what true endings look like." The spirits of conclusion began to move. Chapter 14, The Congress Reconvenes. They gathered in the central chamber of the Provisional Congress, not just the 12 who had ventured into the library, but dozens more. Scribes and scholars, soldiers and diplomats, story spirits and concept wyrms. Everyone who had a stake in the new framework. Everyone who was willing to fight for continuation. "We know what's coming," Saraphina said, standing at the center of the chamber. "The old endings are gathering. They plan to restore the logic of conclusion, to undo everything we achieved in the library." "How do we stop them?" someone asked. "We don't stop them. We talk to them." "Talk to them?" "They're trying to destroy everything we've built." "Their stories," Caris said, stepping forward. "They're afraid. Confused. Angry that their purpose has been taken away. If we approach them as enemies, we validate their fear. But if we approach them as fellow narratives, as beings who understand what it means to transform, we can help them change," the Echo Queen finished. "The way we helped Uchelon change." "And if they refuse?" Dominic demanded. "If they insist on fighting, then we defend ourselves. But we don't destroy them. We don't revert to the old logic of endings. We find another way." The chamber buzzed with debate. Some argued for preemptive action, find the spirits of conclusion and neutralize them before they could act. Others argued for diplomacy, for patience, for the slow work of persuasion. The arguments went on for hours, growing more heated, more divided. Finally, Theren stood. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. The chamber fell silent simply because he had risen, because he was the man who had given his story to a god and survived, because his bare arm was a symbol of everything they had sacrificed and everything they had gained. 7 days ago, he said, "I thought I was going to die. I went into the drowned library prepared to sacrifice everything, my story, my memories, my future. I offered myself to Uchelon because I believed it was the only way to save the rest of you." He paused, looking around the chamber. "Instead, I survived. Uchelon didn't consume me. He consumed my story, yes, but the story changed him. Transformed him. Made him into something new. And now he's down in the depths, learning to be less alone, practicing emotions he's never felt before, reaching out to us because he wants to understand." Another pause. If a god of endings can change, if Uchelon, who spent 10,000 years consuming stories, can learn to feel loneliness and reach out for connection, then the spirits of conclusion can change too. They are not monsters. They are not evil. They are stories, just like us. They are afraid of losing the only purpose they've ever known. And we can help them find a new one. "How?" someone asked. "By showing them what we've learned. That continuation isn't the enemy of meaning, it's a different kind of meaning. That transformation isn't destruction, it's growth. That endings aren't the only way stories can find satisfaction, sometimes the most satisfying thing is to keep going, to keep changing, to keep discovering who you are." He looked at Landra, who nodded, her hand resting on her belly. "We are going to meet the spirits of conclusion," he said. "Not with weapons. Not with threats. With arguments. With stories. With the same kind of connection we offered Uchelon in the depths. And if that's not enough," he shrugged, "then we'll figure out what is. Together. The way we always do." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the assembled delegates began to nod. "Interesting," Kaelin murmured, and the laughter that followed broke the tension like dawn breaking after a long night. Chapter 15. The journey begins. They left at first light. Not all of them. The Congress needed to continue functioning, the world needed to keep turning, the third trunk needed its tenders. But the core group went: Saraphina, Caris, the Echo Queen, Jasmine and Choros, Silas, Kaelin, Helena and Arthur, Dominic and Damian. Theren and Landra, walking hand in hand. Lyra met them at the edge of the Provisional Congress's territory. She carried no weapons, no supplies, just a book of poetry that Helena had given her. "I'm coming," she said. "I've been thinking about what you said. About arguing with dragons. About transformation. About becoming someone new." "And?" Helena asked. "And I think the spirits of conclusion need to see someone who understands them. Someone who spent her whole life pursuing endings, victory, control, the conclusion of all her schemes. Someone who was forced to change and is still learning what that means." "That's brave," Theren said. "It's terrifying. Usually the same thing." Lyra laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. "You've been spending too much time with my brother. You're starting to sound like a poet." "Every mapmaker is a poet at heart. We just use different symbols." They walked together into the margins, toward the amphitheater where the old endings were gathering. The landscape around them shifted as they traveled, becoming less certain, more fluid. This was the space between stories, the margin where narratives were born and died and transformed. "Does anyone else feel that?" Jasmine asked, her hand on Chorus's flank. "Feel what?" Saraphina asked. "Like we're being watched." The Echo Queen tilted her head, her blind eyes scanning the uncertain landscape. "Not watched. Anticipated. The spirits of conclusion know we're coming. They're curious." "Curious is good," Silas said. "Curious means they might actually listen before trying to consume us." "Is that a real possibility?" Damian asked. "Consumption? Everything is a real possibility now," Caris said. "The futures are infinite, remember? That's not comforting." "It wasn't meant to be." They pressed on through the shifting landscape, following the Echo Queen's guidance. She could feel the gathering ahead, could sense the concentration of narrative energy that marked the spirits' meeting place. It was like a pressure against her consciousness, a weight of unresolved endings pressing against the new framework. "They're afraid," she said. "More afraid than I expected. They're not angry, or not just angry. They're terrified." "What are they afraid of?" Helena asked. "The same thing we were afraid of in the library. Obsolescence. Irrelevance. The loss of purpose." She paused, her blind eyes distant. "They don't know who they are without endings. And that's the most terrifying thing any story can face." "Then we'll show them," Theren said. "We'll show them that transformation isn't the end of identity. It's the beginning of a new one." They walked on, toward the amphitheater, toward the gathering of endings, toward whatever confrontation or conversation awaited. The future was uncertain, the possibilities infinite, the outcome unknown. It was, as Kalen would say, interesting. Chapter 16, The Amphitheater. The structure rose before them like a memory of architecture, half real and half imagined, its stone seats carved by hands that might never have existed. Spirits filled those seats, hundreds of them, thousands, shapes that shifted between forms as they whispered among themselves. At the center of the amphitheater, on a stage that might once have hosted dramas and comedies and the catharsis of resolution, stood the tragedy of royal succession. It had taken a form now, a tall figure in royal robes, its face a mask of grief and fury. "You came," it said as the group approached. "We felt you coming. We could have stopped you. We chose not to." "We know," Saraphina said. "And we're grateful." "Don't be grateful yet." The tragedy's voice was like stone grinding against stone. We are here to decide whether to restore the old framework, whether to remind the world why endings matter, whether to undo everything you achieved in the library. We know they too. That's why we're here. To fight us. To talk to you. The tragedy laughed, a hollow, empty sound. Talk. As if words could change what we are. We are endings. We are conclusions. We are the satisfaction of resolution, the catharsis of completion, the peace that comes when stories find their proper finish. Words cannot make us into something else. No, Caris said. But they can help you understand what you're becoming. Whether you want to or not. He stepped forward, the black flame burning on his fingertip. The spirits in the amphitheater murmured at the sight of it. They recognized the flame, knew its power, understood what it had been. You were a reaper, the tragedy said. A gardener of endings. You carried a flame that pruned wild stories, that brought resolution to chaos. And now you stand before us, offering top instead of conclusion. You have betrayed your purpose. I've transformed my purpose. There's a difference. Is there? Caris held up the flame, letting it pulse with the new warmth that had been growing within it. Look at it. Really look. The flame still burns. It still prunes. But it doesn't only end. It shapes. It guides. It helps stories grow in new directions rather than simply cutting them off. The tragedy studied the flame. Its mask-like face showed no expression, but something in its posture shifted. Uncertainty, perhaps. Curiosity. You want us to become gardeners, it said. You want us to abandon our nature and become something else. We want you to have a choice, the Echo Queen said. Before, you had no choice. The logic of ending was absolute. Stories concluded whether they wanted to or not. But now the framework has changed. Now endings are possible but not inevitable. Now stories can choose to continue. And we think that means you can choose too. Choose what? Who you want to be. Whether to remain spirits of conclusion, fighting against the new framework. Or to become something else, guides, perhaps. Mentors. Beings who help stories find their proper shape, whether that shape involves ending or continuing. The tragedy was silent for a long moment. The other spirits whispered among themselves, their voices like wind through dead leaves. Then, you make it sound simple. It's not simple, Theren said. Nothing about transformation is simple. It's terrifying. Confusing. Painful. We've all been through it in the past weeks. Some of us are still going through it. He glanced at Lyra, who nodded slightly. But it's also something else. What? Worthwhile. He walked toward the tragedy, close enough to touch it. The spirit didn't move, didn't retreat, just watched him with its mask-like face. I gave my story to Uchelon, Theren said. All of it, my memories, my emotions, my connections to everyone I love. I thought I was sacrificing myself. Instead, I transformed him. And he transformed me. I'm not the same person who walked into that library. I'm still figuring out who I am now. But I know this much, the transformation was worth it. Not because it was easy. Because it was real. The tragedy stared at him for a long, long moment. Then it did something none of them expected. It removed its mask. Beneath the mask was not a face of grief and fury. It was a face of exhaustion. Of loneliness. Of a being who had spent millennia serving a purpose that no longer existed, and who didn't know what to do with the freedom that had been thrust upon it. "I'm tired," the tragedy said. "I've been ending for so long. I don't know how to do anything else." And when I felt the new framework, when I realized that endings were no longer inevitable, I was terrified. Not because I wanted to destroy what you built. Because I didn't know what I was without it. "That's exactly how I felt," Lyra said, stepping forward. "When the Reclaimers abandoned me. When my family disowned me. When everything I'd spent my life pursuing turned to ash. I didn't know who I was without my ambitions. And then I realized, that was the gift. Not knowing. Being free to discover." "Is that what you're offering us?" the tragedy asked. "Freedom to discover?" "We're offering you a chance," Saraphina said. "Come with us. Join the new framework. Not as enemies, but as participants. Help us figure out what endings mean in a world where continuation is possible. Help us understand the balance between conclusion and transformation. And if we refuse, then we'll still be here. We'll keep reaching out. We'll keep asking. We'll keep believing that you can change. Because that's what the new framework is about. Not giving up. Not assuming that conflict is the only resolution. Continuing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The tragedy looked at the mass in its hands. Then at the spirits filling the amphitheater. Then at the group before it. "This will take time," it said. "We will not all agree. Some of us will resist. Some will fight. Some may never accept the new framework. We know. We are patient." "No, you're not. You're terrified and exhausted and uncertain. You're making this up as you go along. You have no idea what you're doing." Theren laughed. "All true. But we're still here. Still trying. Still continuing." The tragedy considered this. Then, slowly, it smiled. It was an awkward expression. Unpracticed. The smile of someone who had never used those muscles before, who didn't know what joy felt like, who was learning for the first time what it meant to be something other than what they had always been. "Interesting," it said. And somewhere deep below, in the crushing dark, a god who had once been the ending of all things heard that word and practiced his own smile in response. Epilogue, the continuing story. 3 months later, Theren stood in the garden of the Provisional Congress and watched his daughter take her first steps. She was small and fierce and utterly determined, this child who had been conceived in the shadow of apocalypse and born into a world of infinite possibilities. Her name was Aurea, a musical term, a beginning, a promise, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness and something else entirely her own. "She's walking," Lendra said, her voice hushed with wonder. "She's falling," Theren corrected as Aurea tumbled onto the grass. "She's doing both. That's what walking is. Falling and catching yourself, over and over." Aurea got up. She took another step. She fell again. She got up again. "She's persistent," Theren said. "She gets that from you. She gets that from both of us." They stood together in the golden afternoon light, watching their daughter learn to walk, and around them the world continued its transformation. The spirits of conclusion had not all joined the new framework. Some still resisted, still gathered in the margins, still dreamed of restoring the old logic of ending. But more and more of them were changing, slowly and painfully, learning to be something other than what they had always been. The third trunk of the world tree continued to generate new stories, narratives that had never existed before, possibilities that astonished even the most jaded scholars. The concept wyrms had declared these stories logically unprecedented and had embarked on a centuries-long project to catalogue and analyze them. Uchelon still sat in the depths, but he was no longer alone. A small community had formed around his toying throne, spirits of continuation, former endings, curious beings who wanted to learn from the god who had been transformed. He was teaching them what he was learning himself, how to feel, how to connect, how to be part of the web of narrative that bound all stories together. And the old endings that still resisted, they were not forgotten. Every week, someone from the Congress made the journey to the margins to talk with them, to argue with them, to offer them the same choice that had been offered before: transformation, participation, continuation. Some days it felt like progress. Some days it felt like futility. Most days it felt like both at once. "How's your arm?" Lyra asked. Theren looked down at his bare right forearm. The skin was still pale from years of being covered, but now there was something new there. Faint lines, barely visible, like ghost images of the map that had been burned into the metal. "It's coming back," he said. "Not the same map. A new one." "What does it show?" He studied the faint lines, trying to read their meaning. Possibilities. Connections. The web of narrative that binds everything together. But it's not fixed. It shifts. Changes. Every choice we make, every story that continues instead of ending, the map adjusts. "So you're still a map maker?" "I'm still a map maker. But the maps are different now." "Different how?" He thought about it. Before, maps were about certainty. About knowing where things were and how to get there. Now they're about guidance. Suggestion. Showing possibilities rather than destinations. That sounds harder. It is. But also. He smiled. Interesting. Lyra laughed. "You've been spending too much time with Kaelin." "We all have. The man is infectious." Aurea took another step. This time, she didn't fall. She wobbled, caught herself, and took another. And another. And another. She was walking. "She did it," Lyra breathed. "She's doing it," Theren corrected. "It's not finished. She's still learning." "That's the point, isn't it? It's never finished." "Neither are we." They watched their daughter walk across the grass toward the world tree with its tree trunks, gold, green, and water pale. The leaves whispered with stories old and new, endings and beginnings, continuations and transformations. And somewhere deep below, a god who had once been the ending of all things felt the pulse of a new story beginning and practiced his smile. It was getting easier now.